Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us at the launch of Life After Oil. I'm Nick Smith, the originator of the project, and I'm going to say a few words by way of introduction about what we're up to before handing you over to some of our other contributors. I think before any conversation about oil, it's really critical to be aware of the very tricky paradox that we have, in the sense that oil is so critical for our everyday life. Cut it off today and we have chaos and mass starvation within several days. At the same time, cut it off in 20, 30 years, keep going as we are, and we have that same chaos and mass starvation as part of the climate crisis that we're already entering down the line. And in any conversation, I think it's really important to keep that in mind, and it's particularly the case, I think, in thinking about the careers of people who are in the oil industry. And it can sometimes get polarised. There's some thought that we should stop oil now. I don't think Just Stop Oil ever said that, but they've been accused of it. And you'll hear some major oil company CEOs blithely refer to the need to meet never-ending energy demand from customers without any cognizance of the consequence of that. But as I say, I think there are many, many fossil fuel professionals who do fully understand that paradox and are in a position where they're wrestling with the decision about what that means for their career. And I think it's especially the case in the last year or so, as the major oil companies have been rowing back on their plans for transition. So supporting their thinking is the purpose of our group, of our organisation. And we don't have any particular single thing that they ought to be doing, policy that we want to tell them to think. We've got a broad range of attitudes and thoughts, and have debates and heated discussions amongst ourselves about what the best thing to do is, but our model is to let people explain their stories. And there's a very broad range of people doing that. We've got people on 4 continents: Canada, USA, through to Australia, India and Europe. I think we've got representation from most of the major oil companies, people that have worked there in the past. And in terms of when they made their career move, we've got one person who left just before Christmas, and my notes did actually say that our earliest quitters were from the 1990s. 2 of them in the room, Neil and Jeremy. But actually I have to scrub that, because we've now found our earliest conscious quitter, who quit as a BP chemical engineer in, I think, 1972. Something that Margaret has discovered. So a full range of people in terms of when they've decided to quit. And in terms of what they're doing now, also a big range. We've analysed our first batch of 24, and half of people actually are involved in activism or campaigning or research, involved in things like Just Stop Oil or shareholder activism and similar, and probably about a third are involved in what you might imagine the more conventional sort of skills transfer into renewables and climate tech directions. Others into academia, and even a poet. And you can look on our website to find a lovely poem about bitumen. So a full range, and some of them have had a single sort of moment of truth when they've realised that they need to make a change. 1 or 2 of the stories we perhaps share later, really quite redolent to that film, Don't Look Up. Others have had a slower awakening. Others indeed actually never had an awakening. They went into the fossil fuel industry because they wanted to make a change for climate, which might be somewhat paradoxical, but you can hear more about that later on today as well. And most of the people have left oil companies, left the oil supply chain, but some remain. I'm in that category. I grew up with the smell of kerosene in the air, and I was brought up as a 4th generation fossil fuel supplier, and I set up a recruitment business focused on oil 30 years ago. But alongside that, I've been engaged in climate related activity for a long time. I ran my first environmental group when I was 20. I set up a media business in renewable energy, and we've transformed the recruitment business from 100% oil to 99% renewable or low carbon energy and climate tech. And indeed, still have business in the oil industry, which is Fuel Oil News, a trade journal for companies that distribute oil. And we believe that their service at the moment is an essential one, supplying essential fuels, and part of our mission is to help the companies transition their companies. So, as I say, you'll find a very wide range of characteristics of our people amongst the 24 stories that we've got on the website. We've got, I think, another couple of dozen people in the pipeline ready to have their stories shared in coming months. And since announcing the launch, we've had more and more people coming forward to express their desire to get involved in sharing their stories. So, to introduce the proceedings, I'll introduce Grace in a moment, who's going to speak next. Before that, I'll hopefully introduce someone else. After that, we'll hear from Arjan, who's going to be joining us from Holland. And then on the panel, we have Jackie and Guy and Joe and Samantha. Special thank you for Samantha, who's a director of Business Declares, which is a supporting organisation for the project. And last, and by no means least, delighted to welcome Roger, who's been hiding behind me all this time. I'm sure that he needs no introduction for everyone. You'll know him from his many, many years at the BBC, and he's been reporting on climate since the 1980s, I believe, picking up many awards along the way. So delighted that he's been happy to come and chair our panel. Thank you very much. So I will hand over to Grace now. Grace is an associate professor at the University of Bath, and she's been leading some research into the attitudes and motives of oil industry people apropos of their careers for a number of years. So I'm going to ask her to come and give us an overview of her research.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. Great to see you here in the room today. Thank you so much for joining. We are witnessing a wave of employees in the oil and gas sector leaving their jobs because of concerns with climate change. Many are leaving quietly, some are leaving loudly, and others are stuck in limbo trying to figure out how to follow the path that they know deep down is right. A 2025 survey of 11,000 employees in the oil and gas sector showed that environmental, social, and governance concerns are the third most cited reason that they're considering leaving the sector altogether. But my research is more about the human stories behind these numbers. In the project that I lead, I've interviewed 40 current and former oil and gas industry workers about the decision to leave their jobs over their climate concerns. They point to the reality that not only have their employers failed to address the scale or the urgency of the climate crisis, but in many cases they've backtracked on prior commitments, putting shareholder interests above a secure future. What particularly surprised me in doing this research is that these people are not disgruntled employees. In fact, they were mainly succeeding in their roles as technical and thought leaders in the industry. They were respected by colleagues and enjoyed actually a lot of elements of their day-to-day work. However, they told me that the cognitive dissonance became too much for them over time. When you experience cognitive dissonance, you try to either change your mind or change your actions. Prior to leaving oil and gas, the climate-concerned individuals I've spoken to tried to do both. They tried to change their minds first, desperately looking for signs that their employers were both capable and willing to change. However, what they saw instead was that public commitments to shift resources away from exploration or to invest in technologies like carbon capture and storage were not matching the internal reality that they saw on the ground. Where they wanted to see change, instead, unfortunately, they came to the decision that they were seeing the playbooks of tobacco companies. They also altered their behaviors, working towards change from the inside, changing roles, speaking up, and trying to lead employee networks for change. However, they found themselves frequently up against brick walls or their concerns increasingly tabled as a future problem. Although most had once believed their employers would lead the energy transition, they eventually saw painfully limited progress inside. Once they realized this, they could no longer stay. These are professionals, but they are professionals who have chosen moral ambition. Many who have left over climate concerns are now dedicating themselves to working towards climate transition from the outside, unencumbered by the restrictions that they faced inside their former employers. They report feeling a lightness, a sense of relief, and no longer be engaging in what one person recalled as the mental gymnastics that they were employing in their day-to-day working lives. They're also increasingly coming to the belief that the industry, unfortunately, will not lead the transition and that change needs to come from nimble challengers. This is a tough lesson, but it's one that we see as business scholars time and time through history, where incumbents are far more likely to become obsolete than successfully lead industry transformation. Life After Oil is being founded by individuals who had to navigate this difficult career transition alone. The hope is that by founding Life After Oil, there will now be a community to enable and support the thousands of individuals in the oil and gas industry who are wrestling with the same feelings of discomfort, continuing to work in this industry, but who are asking themselves, am I on the right side of history? However, those individuals today have not been adequately supported to act on this deep-seated feeling, and hopefully from today they will be. I'm now pleased to hand the floor over for you to hear from some of the individuals who made this difficult decision themselves. And first we have Arjen Keizer, calling in from the Netherlands, who recently resigned from Shell. So if we can get Arjen up there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for that great intro. So my name is Arjen Keizer. I'm based in the Netherlands and I've spent 7 years at Shell, 7 years at McKinsey & Company prior to that, and before that I was an aerospace engineer from Delft University of Technology. And while working at Shell and McKinsey, basically on the energy transition since 2016, it took me until November 2022 to understand the real urgency of climate change. So I was worried, but not worried. And only when I was reading the book, I felt in my heart that something had to change. I felt grief because of my daughter, Anna, who would grow up in a less happy world than I imagined. And I also felt ashamed that I didn't take 6 hours of time to read up on climate science myself in the 6 years prior to that. But I also felt a huge drive to work on change. So that's what I started doing. And right at the moment I had my awareness moment, Wael Sawan took over from Ben van Beurden. There was a webcast and I asked the question, how can we change our shareholder base to go after shareholders with a longer term of investment and therefore an opportunity to invest more in renewables? The question was answered by the CFO very poorly, so I asked a follow-up, which wasn't intended, but my inbox flooded with emails and support messages. So that was the first realization I was not alone, and ever since my space of comfort basically grew. I became the chair of the Future Energy Leaders, the green community in Shell, organized lectures like from Nate Higgins, but also collected feedback about the new strategy and provided that back to senior leadership. And in April 2025, I left because I was part of a reorganization, and instead of spending 80% of my time on selling renewable solutions for transportation, I would need to spend 80% on selling diesel, and that didn't feel right. Recently, I co-filed a shareholder resolution together with 19 former and 5 current employees. I feel there are way more people who are supportive of the resolution and our statement, but many people don't dare to. And I hope by this community that we basically pave the way for others to also start speaking up and be on the right side of history and look their children in their eyes on 20 years' time. For me, consistent messaging is key. So what do oil and gas executives and companies actually find? Are they seeing the urgency or not? So Shell in the climate case from Friends of the Earth and Milieudefensie, basically in the opening argument said the question is not whether climate change requires urgent action. It does, and therefore we support a more ambitious target of Paris to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. But then at the same time, recently in the podcast, they say if society is not net zero in 2050, there would be significant risk that we may not reach that target. So what is it? And is there any regret? And in that sense, Shell knows very well, they are famous for the scenarios that most likely there will not be net zero before 2080, which is their search scenario. Archipelagos even reaches net zero in 2130. And the Horizon scenario does reach net zero in 2050, but it's a goal search scenario, it's a normative scenario. And if you look in the slide that the Shell scenario team has put, they say, if we want to reach net zero, we need carbon pricing, incentives for renewable energy, CCS and direct air capture, and change daily behavior. But I'm not seeing any of this at the extent you would expect from the company. Yes, they're advocating in favor of carbon pricing and some blending mandates, but they are not, for example, speaking up against misinformation, which is also very much undermining the credibility of governments. So therefore, I think people should think if they want to stay or go. I think people should first think, how do they want to stay honest to themselves? And do they have the privilege to stay? Can they pay their mortgage if they would leave? Not everyone is as privileged as many of us in the room. And if you want to stay, take action from within. That can be in your role, build coalition, challenge assumptions, but also outside your role. Join a green community, speak up on intranets, and be part of the change. And if there is no progress, at some point you can leave. It took me 3 years, but I think for everyone this can be different, and I like to have the discussion with people in this community. So thanks for the opportunity to quickly speak, and now handing over to Roger for the panel discussion.
Actually, before we do that, we've got a last minute entrant to our speech. If I could ask Jeremy to come up and say a few words. You need to be on camera, so come on. So, as many of you know, I'm sure, Jeremy Leggett is a former geologist and renewable energy entrepreneur and now rewilder.
Thank you. Zero prep time. I suppose what's in my head is bad news and good news. The bad news was that apropos the 30 years that we have to, or 30 years before utter disaster, I actually quit the oil and gas industry 36 years ago. And at that time, I was an earth science lecturer and I worked on the history of the planet, but it seemed obvious to me that there was a problem, and I expected an exodus then. Boy, was I naive. And so that's kind of the bad news, and you sort of can't help occasionally thinking, if only this kind of thing had happened then, how different would the world be looking now? But the good news is, I think, I don't mean to pander to the BBC, but I recently listened to the Reith Lectures, this year's Reith Lectures. And for those of us who are still desperately keen to have hope, and believe that there is some kind of a livable outcome from the dramas we're living through, these are great lectures, and also by a Dutch person whose name... Rutger Bregman, senior moment. Brilliant lectures, and I won't summarise them, but I do recommend them to everybody. And the history of the abolition of slavery, which I knew nothing about. He takes all his lessons from history. So small groups of people can make a massive difference. It's the theme of the 4 lectures. The subject area is called the moral revolution. And so hopefully this won't be a small group of people. As this organisation grows, it will be the kind of organisation that the forefathers of the abolition of slavery dreamt up. And I wish it every success, and I will certainly be trying very hard to help it in any way I can.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So we'll now pass on to Roger. Roger will be conducting the panel discussion, and he will also move on to Q&A for anyone in the audience who would like to ask a question. Thank you very much.
We can have it over here. No pressure then, you guys, just the equivalent to ending slavery. Set the bar pretty high. What I'm going to do is just to introduce each of these speakers in turn and then ask them to do a few minutes, sort of sum up. Or, no, you can't have sum up at the end, you know what I mean. And then ask some more questions about you know, did you feel lonely? I thought that was an interesting word to come up in the preceding remarks. And to talk a lot, quite frankly, as well about feelings, because people, when they're hearing stories, they relate to feelings, not just facts. And probably the climate change movement has been a little low on feelings. Anyway, first of all, it's going to be Samantha Cooper. She spent over 20 years at BP, ultimately leading the global petrochemical feedstock trading book, and left in 2015 to become a director at Business Declares.
Thanks, Roger. And I like the word feelings. So actually, though, when I was trying to write this, I got quite emotional. So maybe we'll have not too many feelings, or try and just keep it above the bar.
So there's no limit on feelings at the moment. As chair, I can
provide tissues.
Yes.
So yeah, my story's going to be quite different to quite a lot of other people, because I can't claim that when I left university I was at all climate aware. I joined Mobil Supply and Trading. I wanted to live in London. I kind of wanted to continue a student life but earn some money. I was really excited to join the Mobil Supply and Trading floor. It was quite small, it was very dynamic, it was a lot of fun, it was sociable, but it was also really challenging. It was like constantly solving problems and then celebrating at the end if it went well. Within a year, Mobil had been taken over by BP in Europe to all extent and purposes, and so it created huge opportunity as there were many, many jobs, and I quickly found myself trading LPG and then moving into trading gasoline and petrochemical feedstocks. And I found it quite hard to bridge the time, so I started off absolutely loving it, and I start to talk about the last perhaps 5 years of my career where on paper I'd done very well. I had earned more money than I'd ever expected, but yet if I'd looked at that from leaving university, it would have been way more than enough, but it never felt enough. It was like that you're in a tunnel, you've got to make more money. I remember one year I met my tax really well in November. I got shingles, which is a good show of how stressful it was, but it wasn't enough. And very much I was in a bubble. I might have had six screens with news on all the time. I didn't have a clue what was going on. So my story is one of realising I was disconnected from the real world. I was very much caught in this tunnel of not enough, a scarcity mentality. You know, I suddenly might have needed a swimming pool. I needed this. I found it municipal pools, and they're fantastic. So I started working at Impact Hub Westminster, and I met some amazing people. And my education started when I stopped. I learned about inequality. I started reading donor economics. So just amazing people doing amazing work. And I really had to learn what was going on. And I had to take time to find out what my values were, rediscover my values, time in nature, lower my footprint, and take space. And then I really found my way into climate and realised the huge scale of the problem of climate ecology and how that was completely connected with needing a just transition. And I found Business Declares, where we can help businesses with transformational change. We can then build on the advocacy, galvanising the voices, the positive voices, learn from the fossil industry, the masters of getting a story out there, and try and do that in another way. And I think my life reflects that shift. I certainly am an awful lot happier with a lot less. And the positive alternatives for me have been great, but I can't say that there weren't times when there was this panic having first left. I think loneliness, we talked about grief. But the summary for me is I found a freedom, and the challenges and the learning and the complexity of what I'm doing now is way greater than oil trading. Nobody knows the answers. We're all imposters in some ways, but we're all finding our way, and I'm learning all the time. And I think my reason to be part of Life After Oil is if I can shift, these amazing, how hard it must have been if you've been thinking about this for 30, 40 years, I cannot imagine. But if I can have had my head so far in the sand and make this shift, then how do we get the other people that we so desperately need? And I think those that think the biggest risk is in leaving their job, the biggest risk is in staying what you're doing. It's a false safety that you're creating. So.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm interested in the word enough because it regularly comes out in conversations with people in the city, because you can hit the target for enough and then actually know you need some more. Maybe you do need that swimming pool after all. I'm just thinking about what advice you would give to people who were thinking of going through that transition, because I mean, frankly, just sitting listening to you, it sounded really quite traumatic, almost like maybe a breakdown, you might say.
Great question. I think I felt a brick wall coming, so I stopped, partly for health as well and safety for myself. But enough, when you're working that hard, your footprint automatically is awful because you have no time. And I don't want to talk about this too long, but I actually thought I'd stopped work when it was COVID. But I thought others during COVID would have this feeling of actually what it meant to live, to slow down. There was talk of everyone was making their own sourdough and baking bread. And I was like, yes, there is some freedom in this. It might sound a little bit simplistic, rather than thinking you've got to jump on a plane to the Maldives and constantly buy that. We've been told that buying things makes us feel better, and actually only by taking the time to slow down and realise you have enough. For me, that really helped me see a different world.
Okay, thank you. We're here now from Jackie Rothwell, who spent nearly 11 years at BP working on major fossil fuel projects. And she later worked on low carbon and new energy before leaving to work more directly on climate solutions at Carbon Direct. Jackie, tell us about your experience.
Brilliant, thank you. So I left BP back in May of last year. I'd been there for 11 years. I had a chemical engineering background and wanted to continue along a technical pathway. So I took the well-trodden route of joining an oil and gas major. I joined in upstream oil and gas projects initially, and had a fantastic few years of rotating every couple of years, different projects, different locations, learnt a huge amount. And it was around 2019 when various climate movements started gaining prominence in the press that I took a pause for thought, and I really started to think a little bit more about where I wanted to take my career and the impact that I really wanted to have as an engineer on the planet. Around 2019, I started talking more internally around wanting to move into decarbonisation, and that was kind of the easy transition, initially decarbonising oil and gas assets, and I learned more around the scale and the magnitude of the problem ahead. In 2020, BP did set its net zero targets, and that was a really exciting period. It felt like the company's strategy and my personal motivations were coming together. And I was really looking forward to having a really good opportunity to have transformational change within the broader energy system. I moved into new energy, which was hydrogen, biofuels, or CCS, and had a brilliant few years of learning all around energy transition businesses, both the opportunities and the complexities of those. And over time, it became more and more apparent that the pressures, both external and internal, on the oil and gas majors would make it really difficult for them to play a truly leading role in the transition. And that's when I really started to think about what my future would look like and whether that would be to continue within BP or step aside. And that was around 2024. I decided that it was time to look elsewhere. And it was really difficult figuring out where and what I could do. I had a very traditional pathway, and figuring out how to translate the internal language of the oil and gas industry into the outside. I ended up at a company now called Carbon Direct, and I've managed to continue that technical pathway. I perform a lot of technical due diligence on fantastic carbon removal projects all over the world, and it's truly incredible. It's incredible to see projects that are making progress. They might not be on some of the scales that some of the big sort of 1 to 3 million tonnes a year reduction that some of the oil and gas opportunities were. But to be making incremental progress is very important to me. The other big reflection is how freeing it has been to step aside from the feeling where I need to justify, defend or caveat wanting to work in decarbonisation and low carbon. I can wholeheartedly talk to the fact that I just want to work on energy transition projects, and that's incredible. Speaking with colleagues now who are still within the company, I do recognise that mental burden that I felt myself under, and the justification and the mental hoops that you're needing to jump through to make yourself feel good about what you're doing. So my role here within Life After Oil is to really showcase one of the many different pathways that we've all taken and really help those people who might be exploring different opportunities, what might be out there for them.
Thank you. I mean, I know there's a wide range of views represented in the organisation. I just wonder, as a former BP employee, let's suppose you had put yourself in the position of chief executive when you'd done all your green measures and you turn around the next day and you'd been slammed on the stock market by mainly just by one investor. And it was quite clear that your position would not be tenable if you allowed that to continue, so you just turned and did volte-face. Do you not have some sympathy with that from the personal point of view and professional point of view?
Yes, there is definitely sympathy from a personal and professional, and primarily from a professional perspective, understanding the full organisation and really having a lot of colleagues and friends within the company. I think,
what would you have done as CEO?
I think... Ooh, I'm
Sorry,
not paid enough for that.
Hello, men,
I
worry
wish
about
I
this
was
question, and I'm so
CEO.
glad it's going to Jackie.
I did work for the Today programme for many years. I do apologise. It's hardwired. I'm 35 years. I'm sorry, I can't stop.
No, it's a very good question. I think the thing that I really struggled with was where the company and the organisation would advocate for both continuing the proliferation of fossil fuels as well as outward discussions around the change of direction towards renewable and low carbon areas. So you somewhat need to pick which direction. You can't both continue to advocate for lots of subsidies and tax breaks for fossil fuels at the same time as wanting support for decarbonisation.
And we heard talk earlier on about disinformation. Do you think that's important too? I think BP are less guilty of disinformation than some of the others.
I think everyone has had some form of greenwashing claims against them. I think the important thing is, and it came out a few years ago, is around matching the narrative externally to the actual actions internally. So yes, I think understanding the scale of how much was being done internally versus what was being put outside, that created a real misalignment.
Thank you. Now we've got Jo Alexander. She's spent 2 separate periods at BP, leaving first after 11 years in 2015 and again in 2023 after further 3 years. We'll find out why in a minute. She now works as a freelance consultant in the NGO sector and is an aspiring author. I have no more details on that, but it sounds interesting. She no longer believes, and perhaps this harks back to the previous comment, she no longer believes that profit-led business can drive systemic change. And she advocates for a slower, more considered way of living, which you've adopted for.
Thank you, Roger. Great. Yes, I'm Jo. I'm a geologist by training, and I've joined and left BP twice. I joined in 2004 as an exploration geologist because I was really impressed with Lord Brown. He was taking the company beyond petroleum, and I thought this is the kind of company I could work for, and maybe one day I can work my way into alternative energy or carbon capture. And after 10 years in that job, I mean, there weren't really those opportunities. I realised alternative energy had kind of disappeared, and I just found myself thinking, I don't think that I can spend my whole career doing this. After 10 years, I've got to make the choice to stay or go. And there was a voluntary redundancy round, and that kind of gave me the kick that I needed, and I didn't really feel ready. And after I left, I did feel really lost. It took me a long time to find a program called On Purpose, which I rave about. It's a program that helps people into social enterprise, understand a different way of running businesses, really allowed me to reconnect with my values, and you know, how much I love the planet as a geologist and don't want to exploit it. Learned about systems thinking, and I found my way into Share Action, an NGO where I still do research, you know, learning about sustainability and influencing investors. So very happy with, you know, it was hard to leave, but I really found my place, was much happier, and kind of to my own surprise almost, I went back to BP in 2020. I went to BP's AGM in 2019, annual general meeting, and I stood up to talk about my displeasure with the fact that the company wasn't doing enough on the energy transition, and when were they going to allow their employees to help the company change, because I talked to my former colleagues and they were really frustrated and they wanted to move out of oil and gas. So I met Bernard Looney, who I didn't realise at the time was going to become the CEO, but he told me the company was going to change, have a purpose, and I just thought, amazing. Like, I just found myself saying, I want to help, and I wasn't naive enough to think it was going to work, but I kind of thought I quite like a front row seat to how this might go. And I got one. And it, yeah, over the 3 years that I was back helping them with purpose, I think I realised two things. One was that trying to make systemic change from inside a profit-driven, hierarchical, siloed organisation so hard, and I was exhausted. But the other thing that I think is that I lost hope in a story I told myself. The story was that climate change is so urgent that we need to use the scale and resource of big business to make progress. And I've heard other people say this as well. And I just lost belief in that story completely. And I left after the first rollback in climate targets. I was incredibly angry, and my father had just died. So I had all of this grief around the loss of my father and the loss of this belief and hope, and it just amplified each other, and I was very angry, and I told everybody how angry I was, and I decided to leave. And after I left, I got very depressed, and it took quite a long time to get better. Yeah, and I don't use that word lightly. I don't think I knew what depression was until I experienced that. And then when I share that with people, they say, well, do you regret going back for a second time? And it's a really good question, because there is not a simple answer. Sometimes I think, yes, I regret it because I had no idea the kind of toll it would take on me. But also no, because I think something in me needed to see that. I think I needed to see that belief collapse so that I could figure out other ways. So now I've left again. I think it is an exploration of how can we together try and shift systems. And this community is super important to me, because I've benefited from people supporting me through my leaving process. It's time to pay it forward. And I think it's really important we're visible as a community, because I think people leave and disappear, but actually we don't. I think there's going to be some safety in numbers if we can tell our stories together.
Thank you very much. Can I ask if do you have a family, or?
No.
I'm not, that's very unwoke, I know, but it goes to the next question,
yes.
which is the redundancy money was obviously a factor. If there had not been redundancy money, do you think you would have gone? And if there is another person in your life, what did they say?
Lots of questions. I don't have children. My husband's always been supportive of whatever I decided to do, and he was very supportive of me leaving. A bit surprised when I told him I decided to go, but
he's not in the oil business, presumably.
No, he runs a small business, and he used to be a radio producer. So, but we've always kind of taken turns and supported each other. We've both had career transitions, and that's been lovely to be able to support each other.
It's a big hit to walk away from a BP salary.
Yeah, I'm quite open about money, so I'm happy to share all the numbers. But I think I recognise what Samantha said about like I felt like I needed more. I wanted a house, and I think when I left, I just realised that we had this lovely flat. I didn't need anything bigger, and I just started to make the most of what I had, rather than let go of the kind of striving for more. And there was a lot of kind of peace that I felt with that. But I do feel I'm lucky because I don't have children. I have the freedom to make these kind of crazy decisions. I don't feel responsible. We had a dog, but he didn't cost much to run.
We sold my house. When I came down to London, we had a substantial property, but I was in a job that made me so miserable. I said to them, I'm going to leave. But before I did that, I got my wife to take a pregnancy test, and it was blue. And so I went into the office, and from the next day, it was my resignation day, and I had no job to go to. That was bracing. Anyway,
See
Guy
where the
Mansfield.
question comes from now.
Yes, absolutely. No, bizarrely, the money that I'd lost from being freelance with no money and no contacts was matched by helping to catch a bank robber with a sawn-off shotgun. The two sums. Sorry, I'm digressing, aren't I? Anyway, Guy Mansfield. Guy worked for 25 years at a major energy company. It doesn't say which one here on my briefing. Never mind, we'll find out soon. He transitioned from deputy CFO to become a board advisor and climate coach. His work now supports organisations focused on renewables and climate infrastructure.
Thank you for the introduction, Roger. So yes, it's been various different companies whom I have worked for in the energy sector, but it's principally Total Energies. So it's the French connection on the table today. But to your point, Roger, about feelings and to what Gracie said before, I think my journey, I'd like to focus on the cognitive dissonance that I got to in a certain point. My sector is finance, actually. So I found myself in oil and gas almost as an accidental passenger. And that almost goes some way, perhaps even now I'm justifying myself joining the industry at that time, but it wasn't an issue. I think it was only COP2, that's how old I am, when I was joining oil and gas. The climate discussion wasn't on the table. There was very much a case that we are here to provide energy, and energy can be in any form. Fast forward 15 years from that, and obviously everything else going on in the world and looking outside, market analysis, very finance focused, you start to pick up on all the signals and everything that's happening, your own climate literacy increases. And to that point, you start to see that, you know, in the industry at large, people were starting to say, well, it's not a production issue, it's a consumption issue, you know? So people in the fossil fuel industry are producing, and they're producing because people need energy. But if you want to reduce your footprint, then dear consumers, please dial it down. And that's where the cognitive dissonance started to come in with all the effects that Gracie was mentioning about, where, you know, you're trying to reconcile this in your mind, you're trying to change your actions as well. And in my career, it took me lots of different countries, different places, moving every 3 years, like some of my colleagues here have mentioned. I gravitated towards the renewables business as well, and that felt like some discernible action that would make that reconciliation. But with everything else going on, you get to late teens and early 20s. I think the cognitive dissonance had just become too much. It just couldn't reconcile that at all. And I think in the same way it was a slow burn on the way up, it was a slow burn on the way out, because for me, my motivation just disappeared. Once you start to take your foot off the gas, excuse the pun, then you know, things just start to go south. And so I think I had a couple of years to think about what I might want to do afterwards. But I was very keen to join this group because I would have loved to have had some support at that time, just to think and to reflect. What can be done? What can you do? It might be something particular to finance, but just from some of the discussions before, you know, taking a salary hit was not the issue at all. And I would encourage, you know, people in the oil and gas industry to learn that their skills are fully transferable. So I've overcome that cognitive dissonance by moving away from the industry. And I now work advising smaller clean tech and green companies, energy transition, the nimble players on how they can arrange their capital stack, how they can get further, how they can actually achieve the energy transition. So no cognitive dissonance anymore, and that's where we are today.
How many people do you think will be wanting to follow in the footsteps of you guys? I mean, we're looking at a situation now where graduates can't get jobs, and must be very appealing to, you know, if you could get a BP or Shell salary, that'd be pretty handy, wouldn't it? Especially if you want to buy a house and stuff.
Yes, yeah, we are principally thinking about people who potentially leave, but yes, we should perhaps think about people going in to the fossil fuel industry as well. So,
Well, there was talk, I don't know if this has evaporated, but there was talk a couple of years ago about fossil fuel industry finding it hard to recruit. I assume that is unlikely still to be the case. Probably people are crawling over broken glass, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to... my information is 10 years old, but we were really struggling to bring... at BP, so really struggling to bring women into the trading floor, and very much brought in some people who had heard the climate message, and none of them had stayed for more than 1 or 2 years. And then it was just all about, we're not getting our message across properly. But actually what I realised was many people just didn't like the environment, didn't like the fact that they thought they could do a green job and they didn't. So there will be lots of people willing to take on the graduate roles. I think there will be very few truly environmental people going into...
Difficulty with retention.
Yeah, difficulty with retention, or getting those people that want to be genuinely part of the transition.
Yeah.
But my reason to be part of Life After Oil, I'm much more interested in those people that are in senior positions that do have more than enough. And if enough of those people who say, oh, I believe in climate, I just can't make a difference in my job, I do think the big difference they can make is walking with their feet, and there being a very large number of us.
Would be a massive, massive benefit if somebody with a big job title would quit, wouldn't it? How can you work on that? The Russians would have some compromise. I mean, come on, get inventive.
We're starting right here. I mean, another thing, Bernard Looney, lots of different ways we could go with this, but actually I agree, being a lone oil CEO who's still being judged on oil profits is going to bomb. But if actually somebody who was a lead CEO left and said, this is where we need to go, but I'm unable to do this in this current environment, you then start to get much more of a movement, which is what we need.
How would you get to those people?
We start here. We start with you. Start with famous people.
I did want to ask that, how you get there. I mean, clearly, there were some inspiring words earlier on from Jeremy, but you know, your numbers are small. There are thousands of people working in the oil and gas industry. I asked the North Sea Authority for numbers, and they haven't got back to me. But they're going to be large numbers, and you are very small. And based on my efforts today, I tried to get this on the Today programme on 5 Live, but they didn't touch it. And hopefully we'll get some more pickup later. But it's going to be hard work, isn't it?
Absolutely. But I think it all starts with the conversations we have. And you go out to dinner and one person says, I've left, that gets somebody thinking. So in all impact work, I think you share your stories and you're not afraid of difficult conversations. All of us do know a lot of people still in the oil industry and are meeting with them regularly. It's no coincidence, this is International Energy Week now, not Petroleum Week. So yes, it starts with talking and discussing and making this a topic that is on people's radar.
Yeah. And I'm going to bring in other people in a minute, but I just wanted to go down the panel. I mean, hope is in short supply at the moment. I'm just wondering where you all stand on the hopeometer.
Yeah, it makes me think of Joanna Macy's work. She died last year. She talks about the difference between passive hope and active hope. And I think when I was an activist outside BP, I had this active hope because I felt like I was doing something that actually could, even if it was small, just make that kind of incremental progress and make like a real difference. But I think once you go into an organisation where like all of the decision-making power is right at the top, so you don't really have the agency that you had outside, it just happens slowly, it gets kind of worse. And you slip into passive hope, and you put your hope in what other people could do, and you're kind of voting with your feet. And I suppose the question of hope makes me feel like I just want to reclaim active hope. And I don't think I'm that optimistic, but I want to find places for hope. I want to find communities of people that are doing things that are useful and that will at least make me feel well and make me feel like I'm doing well.
I'm very, very optimistic on your scale, but I think that's because it's layered to some extent, and people might not have hope in, say, the political sphere or large institution sphere, but the work that I'm doing at the moment, which is at the grassroots level, with startups and scale-ups and the energy transition, there is a lot going on there. There is almost an abundance mindset. You're talking about electricity rather than energy, and there's really hope for a revolution in the next few years.
Jackie?
That
You're
really
nodding vigorously.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It resonates so much. I remember when I was leaving and I was having conversations with senior leaders, and one said to me, you know, don't despair, things won't be as bad as you think they are. The climate change isn't so bad. And I said, well, my best way to not despair is to be actively working on solutions. And what I've found incredible since leaving is the amount of activity going on, and the various startups, the amount of people involved, and the real passion and the energy behind it. It's a world away from where I felt when I was within BP.
Thank you. Samantha?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm positive about the fact that I won't regret what I'm doing. So 5, 10, 20 years time, I'll look back and say, I tried. I did what I could. I didn't keep quiet. And that's what gives me hope versus, as you say, that passive or that giving up.
That feels slightly heroic almost.
No. I think it's sane.
You did your bit.
Yeah, well, I'd look at some friends who, they might drive like 5 miles to recycle a toothpaste tube, and they're really pleased with what they've done in their sort of private life, and they see themselves as being environmental, and yet going to work and work for an oil company and keep doing what they're doing. And so for me, I feel positive about that. The cognitive dissonance, my life is integrated, and it makes sense to me to do what I'm doing.
Brilliant, thank you. Let me take some thoughts. How are we going to run it from the floor?
I'll leave it to you if you want to choose anyone who'd like to ask a question.
Well, who would like to ask a question? Perhaps that's an easy thing. Yes. Or make a comment. We'll start off with this lady's question
Well, you're
first.
definitely the most interesting people that I've had the pleasure of listening to in a long while. So I think for me personally, I find it. I mean, I probably don't have very many conversations with people who are working in the corporate space, and I don't really understand their language. But when I do, I always come away A, bored, and B, traumatised. I feel the opposite with you lot. So I just.
While we're listening to you, do you want to tell us who you are?
I'm CC Law, and I've been a writer around climate and nature for a long time. So
Right.
yes, I wondered. So when we started, I think maybe you said, Mick, that there was no policy objective. Do you think you could get one? Because just from a comms and strategy point of view, there's so much information that you're giving us. This is very nuanced. I'd love to know about your exit interviews, by the way. But there must be something that you could ask for, or I mean, you know, policy asks in a campaign really just codify something that needs to happen, some change that needs to happen. And also, I feel like it would help you get on the news programmes. It would give you a more complete, like, thrust, dynamic story. Like, you know, there's this weird group and they want this, this and this, and that's how you get in. So I wondered if that policy stuff and that sort of agitation, that sort of specific campaigning is something that would come. Maybe it'll be around HR or pension rights, or, you know, making it easier, some of the architecture of leaving jobs, of stepping away, having put in quite lengthy careers and having contributed to their renewable story.
Okay, let me ask them. Who wants to field that question? No, nobody.
I'll start. It's interesting because we had the full page in the FT at the weekend,
Yes.
we had this very conversation about it's great that we don't all see how change should work in exactly the same way, because actually change is going to come from angles. But I think what we do agree on, that the time, I'm going to take Helena's words, but the time for a gradual transition is over. And I think we are all agreed on the urgency of the problem, the need to speak out. And perhaps with expertise and people of storytelling expertise, you could even help us to turn that into the very clear narrative of the things that we need to be
Why
saying.
don't you two continue this conversation at the end? Woman at the back.
Yeah, my name is Grace Murray. I'm from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, and thank you very much for the panel discussion. Really commend you all. I wanted to pick up on a point that Jackie mentioned around in your exit interview, saying that people are saying, "Oh, climate change isn't that bad." I wanted to ask a question about the kind of climate denialism that we're seeing now, particularly at local level in the UK. We have local councillors now saying they don't believe in man-made climate change at all. And so I wanted to ask you about how you feel about the trajectory of climate denial in the UK.
A very big question. So I think it's a really tough one, and the thing which I always think about is the narratives around climate change. Especially in the UK right now, you see very strong narratives that are starting to coalesce against net zero. And I do wonder whether, I'm an engineer, I'm not a communications expert, but how to bring people along the journey of the, at times very complex climate science and at times very far away impacts that don't directly impact our life here in the UK, how to spin, or not how to spin, but how to bring that message together in a really impactful way. I think that's not being done so well. I would love to see more of that. I think in another world, if my world wasn't maths and science, maybe I would have gone into that, but I am not a communications expert. It's something that's incredibly critical and needed, and I wish to see more of it.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm Martin Wright. I've written about this sort of stuff for a while, and I'm a director of Positive News, which is the hat I'm wearing today. Oh, good. So, a couple of questions really briefly. One, I think Joe, you talked about the sort of the story about tackling climate change requires the heft of big business, and it's quite a beguiling story. That, if not large companies. Who? Because you're right about the urgency. You know, it's not going to be just oil. It doesn't appear to be governments. It doesn't appear to be, you know, the UN climate change process. That'd be one question. Just on the life, I'm sort of.
Hang on a second. Let's take these one by one.
Yeah.
And see where they come.
Okay,
Do you want to have a
give
go
it
at
a
this?
go. I think that story was really beguiling. And when you lose faith in it, it's scary because you think exactly that, who really has the power. And I suppose that's why I'm attracted to the movement around citizenship, and John Alexander's book called Citizen, who says, you know, something like the answer to all of this is all of us. I think it kind of comes down to citizen action and community action, and I know it's quite piecemeal, but that feels like what it needs, but then to connect that to policymakers. So if I've lost faith in business, the profit maximising kind, then I think I'd put my faith in kind of community action, social enterprise that has a real governance structure that allows for purpose, and to connect that into policy making. So
Okay, thank you. Hang on a second. I just need to check how many other people want to
There's
speak.
also a hand, sorry, on this screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to add on this topic actually, because I think this is a systems problem where shareholders have increasingly demand for short-term returns, and like someone said, I also have sympathy for our CEO. I think they cannot invest in projects that don't make a return, but we need to do advocacy from the oil and gas sector and from the business sector, because who are now speaking up against climate disinformation and recognizing the urgency? It's climate activists, led politicians and scientists. That means it is a polarized topic. We shouldn't have this as a polarized topic, but it will affect all of us. The discussion should be how are we going to tackle it, but whether it's a problem we need to collectively tackle. I actually founded the climate movement Employees for Our Future because people at banks, in the financial sector, everywhere, they understand the same. The problem is in the top 100 of all these companies, there is people with different personality traits, and they seem to focus on the short term and their bonus. I think the big job titans who left, one of the questions, quite a few left when Ben van Beurden left and gave the rudder to YL Sawan, but they all left quietly. And there is a huge sort of loyalty to the company. And I think that needs to break. We need business leaders to speak up, like Paul Polman is doing, and some examples are doing, but we all need to do. And I think that's great about this community, because these are people who are speaking up. And it's not necessarily a Shell problem, it's a system problem, but all of us have agency, and there is no time left. And I think in that sense, it really comes to the question, how can oil and gas executives also recognize the urgency? Because at some point they need to choose what type of world do they want, and the same for the people in big tech. So I just wanted to add to a couple of questions in that.
Okay, thank you very much. We've reached 5 o'clock. Jeremy.
Just a thought around this last passage of discussion, a positive thought. What's exciting me about this new organisation is that it's a classic case that a little is going to go a long way. I have a conversation with Van Burden in my head. Can't remember where it was. It was on a panel somewhere, and he really majored on our biggest problem in the oil and gas industry is talent, the retention of talent. If we don't retain talent, we will die. It was really quite dramatic about it. So a little bit of action by a group like this is going to go a long way. And in the context of a couple of other things, let's not forget the good old International Court of Justice. People all over the world now can and should and will take governments and companies to court on the back of that judgment from the judges of the International Court of Justice. They should do so. Maybe this group can figure out a lever there. And my final thought to throw into the mix is, let's not forget, whatever psychopathic CEOs might say about oil and gas forever and can't escape it, the capex is ramping down. It's been ramping down for years, particularly in exploration, and they're winding their industry down behind closed doors. You see it in the IEA figures, you see it in the work of Carbon Tracker, who I had the privilege of chairing. So, guys, a little bit is going to go a long way, and the abolition of slavery is not, I think, an inappropriate analogy.
Thank you. Nick, do you want to wrap up?
Yes, that's fine. There's no other questions. Yes.
Sorry, can I ask one question? It's Margaret for your news. What does success look like for you? If we were to meet again in a year's time here or 5 years' time, what would you say we've done what we set out to do?
Can I take that? At the moment, what I'm seeing, and it may answer some of the other questions as well in the context of your question, is there's a lot of difference between the professional conversations and the private conversations. So if I were to have a bunch of oil and gas executives who are still working in the industry now, here, to talk about their opinions, they would probably give their professional opinion. Take them all one aside and have a quiet conversation. They probably might have some cognitive dissonance themselves. So if we can get that private conversation into a more public space, I would say that is one key success factor.
Anyone else?
Yeah. This might take more than a year, but I think the difference, we have some different views on whether you can make change internally or you need to leave. I'm of the position that it's good to leave. So I would love it if our community grows because people find us, but because they've left, and that they maybe find their way into organisations doing low carbon energy, or maybe into organisations that have different types of business models and are more distributive about the profits they make, and their goods are truly good and their services truly serve. I think that shift of the talent and seeing that really accelerate would be amazing.
Jackie?
I would echo what Joe has said. It's really around seeing the group grow and seeing us inspire and give hope and some level of comfort as well to others that this is okay to broach. It's not a taboo subject. There are different pathways that they can see others have already taken.
Samantha?
Yeah, I think we touched on it before. Some really senior people choosing to leave.
Be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think that's what we need.
I mean, John Brown's kind of always been hovering on the brink for ages. Actually, I can tell you there's a very quick story. Everybody can go out cheerful. I was invited by John Brown to sit next to him at dinner at the Royal Geological Society when he was president. God knows why, but I was. So I went along. Black tie event, very nice. I'd just come back from California where they were trying to introduce the hydrogen highway. Do you remember the hydrogen highway? Bush's hydrogen highway? Anyway, I went there to do a positive Newsnight film about it and came back thinking it was bullshit. And electric cars were clearly going to win this competition, but were being backed by not enough people. And so I sat next to John Brown, and I waited till the end of the meal, where he drank a lot of wine. And I said to him, I've just come back from the States, I've seen the hydrogen highway. Actually, I think electric cars are going to take over. I think you oil majors are just trying to keep hold of the energy infrastructure through hydrogen. Am I right? He said, yes. I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? I went to tremble all over, and I had my phone with me. We could have just done a soundbite. And I said to him, could you say that to my microphone? And he said, could you pass the port? Anyway, I leave you with that happy thought. I've learned loads today, so thank you for getting me involved. Nick, what are you going to tell the people?
Thank you very much. Just to note, no last questions from anybody before we finish. Yes, one comment from
So
Russell.
I'm Russell Smith, and many of the people here, especially Jeremy from Islamabad 1982. I'm a geologist also, but ended up in projects at BP for 40 years. Left 5-6 years ago. Since then I've been doing what you're doing, all of you, investing in renewable energy startups and helping them. I just wanted to say I'm an optimist. Helena knows that. And I also, to steal from Helena, I think it will take courage for us to have the conversations privately, to your point, with these CEOs and COOs. They are only humans, and they are stuck inside a system that doesn't allow them to be human all the time. So I think privately, and yes, we may be asked to pass the port, but that would be progress, I think. So I personally commit to do that. I'm trying, but we keep going. Thank you, Nick.
Fantastic. No other points or questions? Super. Well, it just remains for me to thank everybody very much. Particular thanks to Roger, and to say that we'd be very keen to welcome everybody. 10 minutes walk that away for a drink in the Marquis of Granby, 6 o'clock. And you're very welcome to speak in more depth with any of the people obviously in this room, and we're expecting, I think, 25-30 people, including some more former oil industry folk there, so you're very welcome to join us. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.